Good morning. We are ready to have some e-learning today. This is actually my second time recording this video because I did the entire lesson without pressing record. So I want you to follow along with the PowerPoint slides that I have uploaded for today. I think the reason I messed up before is I was trying to be fancy and show the PowerPoint on my screen and me and talk, and I couldn't do it. So anyway, just follow along and I'm going to narrate them. So today we're going to look at why sources of data matter and why you shouldn't believe everything that you hear. Just because somebody cites some statistics about some study does not mean it's a valid study and does not mean you should believe them. So we need to be good consumers of information so we know what is truth and what is not. And so understanding this is one way that we do that. So the most common way that people gather information is through surveys. A survey is when you ask questions of a sample of people taken from a population of interest, and we'll be defining those terms a little bit clearer later on. But the sample, the people that you talk to, needs to be representative of the population. That means they need to be like the entire group. The opinions of the entire group need to show up in the sample. Otherwise, the data that you get is not valid. So the things to watch for in surveys that can cause problems are sometimes surveys ask biased questions. What that means is the words that the person writing the question uses sway the people in their answers. So, like if I ask you, hey, would you like this amazing, delicious, fabulous piece of award winning cake or this one from the box? Um, Most of you are thinking you would like the first option. Well, surprise, they're not even real. So the words that I said though made you think that this one was going to be better, and you weren't actually having an opinion on that because there was no cake. You were just reflecting the words that I said. So that's biasing the results, and that's not good. Another thing to watch for in surveys is sometimes the people being interviewed, who are part of the sample, don't want to give their honest opinion about something because they're afraid it'll make them look bad. And so we call that interviewer effect, and that would also slant your results. If the people aren't giving their honest opinion because they don't want to look bad, then you're not actually finding out what you think you are. Another issue with surveys is sometimes people get a survey and go, that's trash, and throw it away. Well, those non-responses are people that you are not getting an opinion of, and there might be a reason they aren't giving you their opinion, and that can slant your results. So those are some things to watch out for, some problems that make surveys less reliable than we would like. Another way to gather data is through experiments. So here is where researchers create a condition by imposing treatment on some subjects, that's called the treatment group, but then not on others, that's called the control group. And it's important to have both groups because you need to know if the effect that you're observing is because of the treatment or if it just would have happened anyway. So experiments are how we determine cause and effect, and that's a really important idea. You want to know is, for example, is this medicine causing people to recover faster? Or would they have recovered anyway, even if I didn't give them this medicine? That's why it's important to have a control group so that you have something to compare to. So those are experiments. Our next slide talks about observational studies, and this is when you look for a connection between the factors that you're interested in, or some factor, and the characteristic of interest. So, for example, maybe I'm wondering if there's a connection between smoking and the lung disease. Well, like experiments, it's important to have control groups and treatment groups here so that you have something to compare. But observational studies can only decide if something is correlated, if there's a connection between them. It cannot determine causation. And you'll watch a video about ice cream with this idea illustrated in a few minutes. So you would think, well, observational studies then don't seem like they're as good as experiments because experiments can allow you to say, oh, yes, this causes this effect to happen. But the reason observational studies are a thing is because sometimes it would be unethical to perform a treatment or an experiment on somebody. Like it would not be ethical for me to give some cigarettes to people and be like, okay, I need you to become a smoker. You need to smoke 3 packs a day for the rest of your life. because we know full well that's probably going to have a negative impact on their life. And so we can't like impose that treatment on them like we would do in an experiment. So experiments are out for that, something like that. But we can do an observational study and say, well, you're already smoking, so I'm going to see what happens to you over time. So we're just observing effects that are already happening. So now I've been throwing around some words, population and sample and things like that. So let's look at those on the next slide. The population is the entire group that you're interested in, all of them. Like maybe I want to find out opinions of teenagers in the United States. Well, there's a lot of them, so I'm probably not going to ask everybody. I'm probably going to take a sample of them. Or maybe I want to find out about people that have had COVID-19. Well, there's a lot of them. There's like 2 billion of them. So I'm probably not going to 2 million of them, something like that. So I'm probably not going to ask all of them because that would take a while. So I'm probably just going to take a sample of them. If you do ask everybody, that's called a census. Now there is a census happening right now in the United States. We only do one once every 10 years, but they are trying to get the opinions of everybody. So that's called a census. That's not a sample. Most of the time we don't do that. We don't want to ask everybody. So if you do a sample, that's where you just ask a few people from the group. And it's really important that that sample is representative, that it reflects the opinions of the entire population. Otherwise, you're not really getting a valid idea of what's going on in your population by just asking certain people. So it's a problem if you have a biased sample. Biased means slanted, and that means that that sample does not reflect the entire population's opinion. And if you have a biased sample, anything that you find out in your study is meaningless, pointless. Whatever statistics you get don't even matter, because if it's not like the population, you can't draw conclusions about your population from a sample that is not representative. As far as sampling methods, there are several ways that you can select that sample, that small group of people that you're going to ask from the population. First of all, we have a simple random sample. Think about like just putting names in a hat and drawing names out of a hat. Sounds simple, right? Well, so that's one way to get a random sample. That's when everybody has an equal chance of being asked, and that's important. However, if my population is, say, all of the people in the United States, I really don't want to write all those names down on little slips of paper and put them on in some gigantic hat. So there are other sampling methods that we like as well. There are also some that we don't like. Self-selected sample is the next one in our list. That's where you have people volunteer to be in the sample. So then you get participants because they volunteer themselves. However, this can cause problems. This can cause bias, because if people are volunteering for something, it means they probably have strong opinions about it. For example, some restaurants will have little postcards on the tables, and you can fill them out and say, oh, how was your experience? Oh, did you have good food? Whatever. Well, in humans, we tend to be complainers more than compliment givers. So you might have 95 people who eat at a restaurant, have a great experience, it's fine. They don't fill out the survey, they're fine. They just leave, have a good meal, whatever. But then you have some people who come in and they're like, oh, my waitress, blah, 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 or my food was cold, blah, blah, blah. And they're mad. And then they're like, where's that card? Give me that card. I'm going to fill out that card and give them a piece of my mind. Well, that means you're getting responses from people who are angry, and not everyone was angry. So that self-selected sample can bias your results. Systematic sample, that's when you have some rule for who gets chosen. So maybe use a computer to take your whole list of all of the people in your population and set it to choose every 10th name or every 100th name on the list or something like that. So you got a system going of who you're going to ask. So everyone has a chance, but you got some system. It's a little bit easier to program than just like drawing names from a hat. Then we have two types of sampling methods that both involve groups. The stratified sample is when your population is divided into groups, and then so many people are selected from each group. So you could think about this as in first period classes. So everybody is in a first period class. They're somewhere, even if it's a vocational school, they've got some first period teacher. So they're divided into groups. You can think about each classroom as being its own little group. And then if I ask 2 people from each classroom, or something like that, then that's called a stratified sample because it's divided up into sections, and then I choose a couple of kids from each of those sections, each of those classrooms. Another sampling method that is based on groups is the cluster sample. And in the cluster sample, you have the population divided into groups. So think first period classes again. But instead of having a few kids answer my survey from each of those groups, I take a couple entire groups. Like I say, okay, I'm going to have the people in Mrs. Freeze's and Mr. Bennett's first period class fill out my survey. So the respondents are clustered. They're in little groups. They're clustered together. So those are some sampling methods, and that one can be effective. It can have issues in it depending on how that cluster is chosen. So anyway, I think that is enough for you to do your homework assignment. It is in the textbook today, so you might have your physical book at home. I don't know. If you don't, you have myhrw.com if you like. I also put PDFs of the files that you will need on Canvas. So you'll be just working them out on paper and then submitting your work on Canvas for today. So I think that's everything. So remember that Jesus loves you and so do I. So do your math.